Well, I hope you all had a nice lunch. This has been provocatively titled, "Is Data Ruining Football?" to wake everyone up after carbohydrates. But essentially, we're 20 years or so into the data revolution in football now. It's part of everyone's life, whether you're working a club, like we saw before lunch on the panels, or whether you're a fan or a gamer, or basically any aspect of football. So we're going to basically investigate and discuss when data is good and when, and you know, Opta might not like this being said, but when sometimes it's not very good and when it's used badly. We've got a brilliant panel here. We've got Michael, who I'm going to refer to as Triple M, your choice from now on. We've got Kerys and we've got Richard, but I'm going to let each of you give a little bit of background as to who you are.
Okay, hello. My full name is Mueller-Moehring. That's the reason why everyone calls me Triple M, because no one in the company can pronounce or spell my name correctly. I'm the head of the data collection and licensing group of EA Sports FC, and my team does all the team and player data for all our football products, plus the license asset you can see and hear in game.
Hi everyone, my name's Kerys. Pleasure to be here. So yeah, I'm a former footballer, so I used to play for Birmingham and Tottenham. Hopefully we've got some Tottenham and Birmingham fans in the room. I've met a few. Hopefully not many Arsenal, but there's normally more Arsenal than Tottenham. But yeah, I retired in the summer, so I'm now, main job is working as a lecturer on a football coaching and performance degree. So we developed the next generation of coaches and analysts, which is why I was pleased to be asked to come on the panel, but then also to attend the conference. Also do a bit of punditry and co-commentary, and I'm also an agent as well. So quite a lot going on post-career, but yeah, really enjoying it, all parts of what I do.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Richard Hughes, not the new Liverpool sporting director, sorry, or the jockey. I'm the producer of Match of the Day. I've done Match of the Day since 2013, so I'm the person to blame for the running order if you're not happy with it.
Cool. Well, I mean, here we are in the year 2024. It was good earlier to see, you know, it's 15 years this year since Opta Joe started. And we have come a long way. You know, I heard someone refer to XG as old hat or in the first half, which, you know, it kind of is. But Richard, to start with you, you were actually at the BBC one of the first broadcasters who deigned to put XG on air back in 2017, year zero for XG in the media. Can you kind of explain, you know, how we got to that point, the difficulties and things like that?
Yeah, I think I learned a big lesson a couple of years before that at the World Cup in 2014 with working with Alan Hansen. Fabulous pundit. I wouldn't say he never read a Opta match pack in his life. Just wasn't interested. But then England played Italy and Pirlo put on a masterclass. And I found a stat that said Pirlo hadn't completed a single sprint in the whole game. And he loved it because it chimed with his analysis and he used it on air. And I think that was the first time I'd ever persuaded him to do anything on air. That just reinforced to me how much you need the buy-in of the pundits to get any of this information out to kind of a mainstream audience. I can't stress enough how important they are for, you know, anyone doing work in this space to sort of get their work out there. So when XG came along, Alan Shearer had a lot of questions straight away and kind of quite intuitive questions about who's having the shot, who's in goal, who's a defender, left foot, right foot, who's putting the pass in, what's the game state, what's the weather conditions. And it kind of made me realise straight away that if we tried to force that into the opening programme of the season back in 2017 and he delivered it on air and didn't do a very good job of it, he'd lose confidence straight away and we wouldn't use it and it would disappear from Match of the Day sort of within 2 weeks and never be seen again. So all we did with it was about as low-key as we could possibly make it. We just added it to the post-match stats. So it was a 3-second graphic over the interviews on each game, and it just sat there for about 2 years. And I think it was probably 2.5 years before we even used the words expected goals in the studio. But just that little graphic, what it did, it just opened up the conversation, and hopefully it gave XG a little bit of credibility in that sort of mainstream space by being on Match of the Day. And the conversation just grew from there, really.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I remember coming up to show Alan what it was and, you know, how it worked and explain that it was, you know, it helped you work out what was a good chance in the penalty box. And he said, I'm Alan Shearer, I know what a good chance in the penalty box is, which was a fair point.
I was enjoying your discomfort immensely.
you know, he's got 260 more Premier League goals than me as it stands. But I mean, Kerys, what's your experience so far as a new pundit, I guess, in terms of using data and getting to grips with new metrics and things like that?
Yeah, obviously it's really useful. Come across the Opta stats pack a few times, and it just helps you feel prepared for the match that you're going to either co-commentate on or do the punditry for. I think especially as a female, certainly doing co-commentary a lot on the Birmingham games. Well, it's received a lot of attention, hasn't it, recently, with a certain individual about, are women qualified enough to talk about the men's games? I think hopefully he's not in the room, he hasn't snuck in, has he? No. I'll get some abusive voice from the back. So yeah, it just helps to make you be more prepared, more organised, and I always do my research on both teams just to make sure that what I'm saying I come across as knowledgeable and I know what I'm talking about. And yeah, overall, I kind of generally get good feedback, and yeah, I think gender, it doesn't matter anyway about gender. You're either knowledgeable about the teams or you're not. But yeah, it's good to use the new stats as well. Gives you some different perspective, things to talk about, and ultimately that's what certainly fans listening, they want to hear, they want to know about these interesting facts. So that's why it's the stats packs and doing the research is good. It just provides the fans with extra knowledge that they might not know about themselves. Yeah, and I think, I don't know if this is true, but as a recently retired player, I think, do you maybe you don't want to upset people that you might have recently played with. I think data's quite useful there. Because although, we've seen fans use it in ways that are, less than constructive, but I think it gives you a nice framework to build a narrative. Yeah, definitely. I think as a player, certainly when I speak about the women's game, I guess I've probably formed some opinions of players myself from playing against them previously. But I guess the objective data allows me to get a true reflection of the players. We were talking about it earlier, discussing it about how players use it. I think certainly some fun instances I've come across. We were talking about the EA Sports ratings, and players like it as a competitive element. I think they like to compare themselves to other players and use it in that instance. I was giving you a bit of grief about my my strength rating, wasn't I, earlier? I wasn't impressed because I'm one of the strongest at Tottenham. I was down the bottom, and all the girls were giving me stick.
We can discuss in a bit.
Well, that's why I had to retire. I thought I can't have another year of a low strength rating, but no. Yeah, I think it's really valuable for players to have the stats. Some players are into it more than others, but certainly now on the pundit side, it kind of just objectifies kind of the views that I might have previously had on a player that aren't actually quite true, and to make sure I'm talking correct information. And you mentioned the EA's flagship video game, once known as FIFA, no longer. Sorry, I know you don't like the F word, but
yeah, please slap me every single time I use the F word. Right? It's hard to get this out of my system.
It is hard.
20 years.
It is hard. It's like Hoover.
The F word, which ends with IFA. Right?
But I think I've always found computer games quite interesting in the sense that you kind of had to build an expected goals model in a sense to make a computer game work. Even back in the 90s, if someone with a player on the pitch had a shot, you had to work out whether that went in or not. But how have you seen real life data kind of influence the video game in the last few years?
It certainly has influenced our game, which is called EA Sports FC, in a way that we can kind of beef up our subjective approach when it comes to player attributes, player overall ratings, jumping and all this stuff, in a way that we can look at data like the real match facts data in a much better way as in the past. Like, to give you a very simple example is watch a random Dortmund game and for 20 minutes and you see that Mats Hummels does a lot of long lob passes, so we assign the trade to him. Right? This is just based on observation, right? But then we can use match facts data to compare which other players might qualify to get this trade, right? So this is definitely very, very useful for us. But still, our ratings, our attributes are still based on crowd intelligence, on subjective assessment of our production team and our community.
Yeah, and I think just the fact that it's out of 100 in various categories, and it's very easy to grasp. And I think you see, people from all age groups who really kind of latch on to those scores. And you see, clubs when the ratings get revealed each year, they can create content from that. Richard, have you seen the BBC's audience's attitude to data change over the sort of past decade?
I think generally people have just become more educated, whether it's through TV or other platforms. We talk about how popular like, kind of tactical analysis is now. Is it used enough on TV? You know, I think there's so many outlets there now with established writers like Jonathan Wilson, Michael Cox. You've got the TIFO YouTube channel, 1.5 million subscribers. I think someone like John McKenzie does some really good stuff in explaining very complicated themes to a much wider audience. And I'm sure everyone in here, you know, listens to podcasts and reads articles and follows tactical accounts on social media. But I think from my perspective is what is the mainstream and what does that mean? You know, is 100, 200,000 followers, is that mainstream? Is 1.5 million mainstream? You look at Monday Night Football and some of the stuff they've done this year has been brilliant around, you know, Jamie Carragher in particular, around out of possession stuff, counter press, blocks. But the audience for that analysis is probably still only a fraction of a Super Sunday Live game. So Match of the Day averages about 4 million a week once you take in catch-up viewing. The Euros in the summer is going to be 20 million, 25 million if England are going well. So that to me is mainstream. And I think that, you know, if we put a 1 hour programme on a Saturday night about rest defence on BBC One, we'd be getting a rest ourselves next week because, you know, I don't think it would land. So I think, you know, the two biggest clips we've had this year, the two best performing digital clips have been Alan Shearer on VAR and Ian Wright talking about toilet training Sean Wright Phillips. So we're setting a very high intellectual bar there, but I think it's easy to feel like when you're immersed in football, the data's everywhere and people are consuming it. I would argue that we've probably only just scratched the surface of it really so far.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, and I think we kind of have. I think there was a few years ago, maybe people assumed that everyone would be talking about data and tactics the whole time, and that Match of the Day would literally be, you know, data and tactics chat with the odd goal if you were lucky. But I think the balance, I think we've reached a better balance now, so that's definitely good. I mean, you know, in terms of kind of gaming, someone's put in a question actually. They said, do you think we'll reach a time where football tries to quantify the unquantifiable? So things like home advantage, pressure, atmosphere. I mean, is that sort of stuff that's looked at by EA in the game?
Yes, we definitely take this into account as well when we do the ratings, sure.
And in what sort of percentage would that make in terms of, you know, if you're playing as, say, I don't know, Dortmund, to use your example, and they're at home against someone in the DFB Pokal from a lower league. Yeah, good terminology. You know, would that give them a big, you know, how much advantage do they get?
A very small one at the end of the day, because the gameplay is still based on the attributes and the qualities of the players.
Okay, and the balance between sort of accuracy and fun, I guess. How do you weigh that?
So authenticity is kind of like the religion of my group. We hate everything which is not accurate, which doesn't reflect the real world of football. But sometimes, I mean, we're still a video game, right? And a video game needs to be fun. When it comes to data, there is not so much discrepancy, but for instance, our stadiums, when you play a match in our game, all stadiums are always filled, right? Like, and my team, now Division 4, was in the game a couple of years ago, and we don't have a big crowd in stadium. So it felt horribly wrong to always play in a full stadium. But I understand it obviously makes more fun to always play in a full stadium. Another example is handball is always deactivated and at default, and our data tells us very, very few people actually activate it because it's just no fun. We also discussed if we should add VAR to the game, but it was a really, really short discussion.
I think a game just about VAR would be really good.
Yeah, there was
good process.
There was talk about like a mode called BRF a long time ago, and now we didn't really like that idea either.
Alan Shearer would like that.
Yeah, you know, everyone's got a verdict. We're getting some good questions coming in, so that's good. For Kerys, how do players use the data that's available to them, and how is it exposed to them? Do players seek out the data, or do they, you know, how does it vary?
I think from my experience, I think one of the big ones is like the physical data. Players after a game, they'll want to know their GPS stats, how much high-speed running they've done, how much distance they've covered. I guess it allows them to justify if they're feeling really tired after a game or achy legs. There's a justified reason for that. I think, obviously, naturally, like, for example, with me as a defender, at Tottenham, we would get analysed on passing. That was the main kind of KPI that the manager wanted to look at. So we'd look at percentage of passes played forward, backwards, sideways, because she was very much wanting to play forward-thinking football. So you'd get the stat, you'd get the pie chart, and it would be all 4 defenders on that particular, how it was presented. And I think naturally, I mentioned earlier about that competitive edge. You naturally want to compare yourself to the other players. You want to be the top. And you can use that going into player meetings, if it is that maybe you've been benched for a few games, you've got some stats from previous games or stats from training, you can kind of use that to that objective data to go into meetings with the manager and kind of use it to your defence, I guess. Players definitely like looking at the data. I think some more than others. But I think it's definitely for that competitive edge, and players I think if they had a bad game, they probably don't look at it. That's certainly what I did. I'd only probably look at it if I had a good game. I don't want to know otherwise if it was a poor performance.
I mean, that's interesting because obviously, fans, as a fan, if your team loses, you don't look at the league table for a week because it's upsetting. But it's interesting to know players can do the same with, their own personal data.
Yeah, do you also use our attributes data from time to time when you spoke to your manager, like short passing 75, which is good?
Is that good?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Long passing 64. You agree?
Nah, it's got to be more than that.
Yeah, of course. They all say this all
That's
the
it.
time.
The players
Always.
are never happy. Yeah, they're never happy. We were talking about it earlier, but I think as we were mentioning, the data hasn't been that around that long in women's football, and the more objective data we can get over a longer period of time, then aspects like this, just the fun aspects of the EA Sports game, will become more accurate. But yeah, I enjoy it. Players can have banter with it, and it's just good to increase that competitive element, because only then makes the players want to get better. If they see they're ranked lower than some of their teammates in their positions, or the match data is lower, it gives them that motivation. So the question is data ruining football? I think certainly from a player perspective, definitely not. It gives you that motivation, understanding of what you're good at, and you can continue to do, but also the areas that you need to work on.
Is football ruining data, more like? But a question for you, Rich. If we've just scratched the surface, as you said, how do we get more people to be interested? How do we get more people to want to go deeper into the numbers? Or is that kind of ultimately impossible on a vehicle like Match of the Day?
I'd go back to the pundits, I think. And hopefully this isn't too controversial, but I think there's been times in the past when people in the analytics space have been a little bit disrespectful and patronising towards ex-players in sort of articles they've written and tweets and things like that. I'm still a bit traumatised by one profile a couple of years ago that said Match of the Day hadn't worked out to cover football after 57 years. I've just come out of Six Nations, working on Six Nations with someone like Sam Warburton, who's incredibly detailed in his prep and analysis, but will absolutely tell you that physicality and emotion is a massive part of rugby. You're not going to create that 1 metre gap after 4 phases unless your 20 stone prop has smashed someone somewhere else on the pitch 30 seconds earlier. And I think football, where the pundits come in, not enough is made sometimes in the conversation about physicality, pressure, emotion, fatigue, all the stuff that's going on around their lives. And I think those intangibles are what the pundits, absolutely massively contribute towards. So if you want to get your work out there, work with them and kind of package your stuff so you're able to sort of practice telling it in 1 minute, because that's all the time they'll have on TV to do it. What sort of graphics will work here, and if you work with them and engage them and buy into it, they'll love it because it'll make them look better, and your work will be getting out to a much wider audience than it might be currently.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Opta have done well over the years, is to sort of make sure that the data is presented in a way that's understandable and not sort of blinding people with science too much. Because, the more people you can get to buy into the concepts, the better, really. I mean, Triple M, in terms of, obviously this season in EA, FC 24, yeah, got it. You've got women footballers in for the first time. And I think that's really interesting in terms of this whole sort of discussion, because I originally got into football as a job because I'd said in a covering letter that I could name 3 players from every team in the country, and that was from playing Championship Manager. And the other day, my son I was watching the Chelsea-Arsenal women WSL game, and he came in and named sort of 10 players from each team, and that was purely from playing FC 24. So, I mean, how have you found that? How's the sort of the impact of that internally gone?
It's massive for our brand, for the whole company, because for the first time, I think in a big part of the industry, we showed the world that we treat women's football like properly, like how it should be. Initially, we just added the women in national teams in the old game, version 16, right? And then we left it there for a couple of years. But then we decided to invest and add female leagues to the game. And last year, we added them to Ultimate Team for the first time, which gave them the opportunity to play with women and men together. We were relatively sure how this would be perceived in certain parts of the world, but we don't care. We think this is the right thing to do, and maybe we can even influence the real world of football in reaching a state where men and women can play together in an official competition.
Well, I think in terms of sort of, you know, player recognition and kind of acceptance, it's really making a difference, which is, I think, really interesting. Just one quick one. Someone's pointed out, is player strength still measured on the Bayo Akinfenwa scale, which, as a Wycombe fan, I'm personally invested in?
Yeah, he's by far the strongest player we ever had in game. I mean, have you seen his arms?
I have seen his arms. I've felt his arms once. But I couldn't make a judgment whether they were 99 or 97.
No, we never do 99. 99 would mean no one is ever better, ever. This doesn't work. I think it was at some point 98 or 97.
Okay.
And then we just use it to compare against other players. If Akinfenwa is a 97, then Pirlo...
What am I?
Well...
negative numbers don't count, do they? All right, we'll move on.
Well, yeah, okay.
To Richard... Over your long time working in football broadcasting, do you have any examples of when data was used or received really badly?
I think it was quite a good one this season, actually, with the Garnacho overhead kick, because it came out quite quickly off the back of that. I think the XG was 0.08, and I think I had a text from Alan Shearer in about 0.08 seconds to go, there's no way that's getting scored 8 times out of 100, and it's 1 in 10,000. And I think that's where sometimes, you know, people might not necessarily understand the models and what goes into creating the models, and they lose a bit of trust then in those numbers, and that's when you can undo some of the good work that's been done with the pundits in terms of getting them to accept and sort of learn and educate themselves about it, because they're very black and white, and, you know, that was never to him an 8 in 100 goal, and that sort of did undermine his trust a little bit then in XG.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good example of, obviously, XG is ranking thousands and thousands of shots, and obviously most of those shots from that position won't be someone doing what Garnacho did, which was impressive, but probably not sustainable. Question for Kerys, do you feel that the use of data in coaching has stifled individuality in players at all?
No, I don't think so. I think players especially will, you know, they can read the data and look at it, but they will still continue to do what they're doing. You know, I think someone mentioned earlier about you kind of sign players because they've got like super strengths, we call them, and they've got USPs that make them who they are. So if anything, yeah, it's a positive thing. The data is good to help with the improvement of the players, so they can identify, you know, what is it in that particular game. If it's a consistent trend that keeps happening throughout games, then they can improve on that. So I think it's important, and again, someone mentioned earlier, that you use the data, but you don't rely on it, because ultimately the data doesn't tell the full story. I think it was Marissa who said there's a lot of other factors, and you mentioned some earlier about, you know, emotions, the crowd. For example, just thinking off the top of my head, I remember I had my stats back that I mentioned earlier about my passing accuracy and how many passes I played forwards, backwards, sideways, and my passes forward was quite low. And so I was just like, I don't remember it being that bad in the game. You know, it's kind of, my emotion at the time was like, I don't have to believe this figure. But then watching the video then back, you know, I saved my passes forward was only 25%, but there was a reason for that. It's because, you know, say we were playing Man City at the time, they were pressing me really well. You know, I had no other option, and actually the right decision was to go back or sideways. So you can use the facts and the figures and the objective data, but there's usually a context around that. You know, that doesn't take into account the opposition, the opponents, what are they doing? So that's why the video is always there to complement and to ultimately establish exactly the true story of what the data is telling us.
And just picking up on what Kerry said then about the crowd, I know for a fact there'd be 5 or 6 players that most pundits would feel performed a lot better during COVID when there weren't any crowds in the stadium than they did do before and subsequently. And you know, just as one example of something that's quite interesting that can affect a player's form that wouldn't necessarily be captured in the data.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole COVID era was very interesting. You know, it's the only season, the 2020-21 season was the only season in top flight history where there were more away wins than home wins, which, you know, given it was largely with no fans, is interesting, and it speaks to the impact, and also makes EA sticking fans in stadiums the right decision, I suspect. So, Richard, one for you here. Would it ever be an expectation that a pundit has to speak well about data to be on the BBC?
No, I don't think so. They're all different. They've all got points of difference. They've all got different, you know, they all played in different... It's like saying, could a forward ever talk about defending? You know, could a defender ever talk about a striker? I think, you know, the analysis is really important, but it's part of it. You know, it's match of the day, it's the quotes, post-match interviews, it's the highlights, it's the controversy, it's the VAR, it's the team news, it's the entertainment, hopefully, it's the debate, it's the narrative, it's the analysis, it's the data. You know, you're packaging 8 games into 90 minutes and you just want to be as comprehensive as you can and give someone with an interest in any of those areas something to take away from the show. You wouldn't tell a pundit what they have or have to do. All you want to do really is give them the best possible platform to be as good as they can on television, and then it's up to them to deliver.
I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more. I'm going to kind of go along the panel and basically just ask, you know, how do you see football in your realm kind of developing over the next few years? You know, how do you think data will kind of impact that, really? I'm going to start with you, Triple M.
I only have 2 minutes.
2 to 3.
Okay, so I think our game will use more and more data. I mean, the amount of data fields we use to describe how a player plays, how he moves, just increases on an annual basis. Where I would really like to go ultimately is, also because I'm a Star Trek fan, I want to be able, and this is just my personal opinion, this doesn't reflect the plans of the company, I want to be able to see a match of my favorite team on the telly, and we're losing at halftime 3-1. I want to be able to directly go into FC, almost, and be able to play with use of real match fact data, exactly the same conditions, same kits, same players, same cards, and be able to turn the game around, ideally in a virtual reality environment. The kind of, are you familiar with Star Trek?
I've heard of it, yeah.
So you know what the holodeck is?
Not completely, but is it like a simulation thing?
Basically, yeah.
Right, yeah.
But we can also move. You can create whatever you want.
Nice.
So I really would like to have a football holodeck.
Nice. Well, the first presentation of today touched on the new Apple Vision thing, so maybe it's coming. So
Maybe.
Rich?
Yeah, I think it's probably quite a pivotal time now with sort of traditional linear broadcasters pivoting towards digital content. You know, whether that's Sky, BBC, TNT. And that's only going to get bigger and bigger. And actually, what's good about that, I think, is that it's going to open up more platforms to put content out for us than perhaps, you know, the 2 or 3 minutes we'd have on a Saturday night on Match of the Day. There might be an opportunity to do more subsidiary stuff in and around. I know the completion rate for a long analysis clip on, say, Twitter isn't very good still, which shows, you know, again, that there's room to grow in that space. But you know, it's all digital. Everything's digital now from our perspective in terms of broadcasting. I think we had 110 million punditry views from Match of the Day alone last season, and that's going to grow this year. So there might be an opportunity going forward to do more graphics, tweaks, just bits of analysis, put analysis out that might not get into the show, and then we'll be able to sort of grow it around the programme and not just have to sort of think about it being in the programme.
One of the most basic elements of data is time. I think I've actually misread the clock from this angle, so we go a bit longer, so that's nice. And that's good, because I was going to ask, I mean, you mentioned there sort of shorter clips and stuff, but I mean, obviously a lot of younger fans are consuming, you know, football through maybe like fan TV or, you know, TikTok clips, or very kind of opinionated, and often, you know, data's used quite subjectively in those, and maybe a little bit not correctly, shall we say. Is that something, say, you would be concerned about the BBC, or is it just kind of been that
only
realm?
not concerned about. I think we've had our own issues, to be honest, with some of the tone of stuff on social compared to Match of the Day. I had a phone call from the Fulham press officer at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning a couple of weeks ago, complaining about a tweet that I hadn't actually seen yet. So it all comes back to Match of the Day, whatever platform it's being put on. I think the niggle sometimes comes when, like, fan channel or a content creator will kind of piggyback something that's been said on Match of the Day and uses it to fuel a sort of agenda narrative against their club, and they hate us and why do they blah, blah, blah. And that's when it gets a little bit toxic, and it's not necessarily data, but it might be, and that's when it gets a little bit frustrating, and that you're being used to sort of fuel that conversation without having any part to, or any right of response.
Yeah, and I mean, Kerys, from a sort of pro or ex-pro's perspective, data can be used badly to sort of, make a case for a player being rubbish when they're clearly not. I mean, how does that feel? I mean, is that something that players can block out, or do you think it's something that, is really difficult to deal with?
It's definitely creeping into the women's game more. Probably more prevalent in the men's, and that's something that women footballers have to deal with, that kind of change. But yeah, I think just it's not always just the data, is it? Just watching games, fans will form opinions. But yeah, if they get access to data and they see a player hasn't performed well in certain metrics, then it can obviously be used against them. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely kind of creeping into the women's game. It's just unfortunately, it's just part of the past, isn't it? As a professional footballer, you kind of, unfortunately, you're in the limelight, and there will be fans that are like that who just want to be those keyboard warriors and try and put you down. But yeah, it's just having to deal with it. And I think there's more education now and awareness of that kind of stuff with the PFA, and they're trying to do more workshops to help players to deal with those kind of situations.
It can be a positive as well with players as well, though, in terms of, we did something with Jack Grealish in his first season at Man City, and everyone was going on about his goals and assists not being great, and we went to him and took his expected assist stats, and he loved it. He said, "Now I really like this," because Pep had been giving him that information, and it just helped change the narrative a little bit about how well he was performing, actually, and he'd just been a bit unlucky with 2 or 3 chances not being converted. So I think the players are much more aware of it now, and I think it can be a positive if you approach it in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think we've got a generation of not just players but managers now as well who've grown up with it and understand it and use it correctly. We've pretty much run out of time. Quick question for Triple M. Are we going to get a commentator in FC 25 using expected goals in comms? Say yes.
How do you know that there will be a version of the game which is...
I'm pretty sure there will.
I officially cannot commit to it.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. FC 24 is the last iteration of the game.
So we don't know if there will be a new version of the game.
If there was, will they do it?
Maybe.
Interesting. And then last one, just for everyone, let's answer the question as we finish. Is data ruining football?
Absolutely not.
In short, no.
No, it's improving it, I think.
Well, there we go. We've answered the question. Thank you to the panel, who were brilliant. Thanks for listening. And thank you very much.